Hey, it's Kay, and this is my editor, Skittles. Today we're going to take a look at the politics in the Fallout games, namely the neoliberal politics of the Fallout video games. So let's start by quickly summarizing what neoliberalism is.
You and I are told increasingly we have to choose between a left or right. Well, I'd like to suggest there is no such thing as a left or right. There's only an up or down. Man's old age dream, the ultimate in individual freedom consistent with law and order, or down to the ant-heap of totalitarianism. And regardless of their sincerity, their humanitarian motives, those who would trade our freedom for security have embarked on this downward course.
Neoliberalism is the dominant ideology in the capitalist world. It aims to eliminate the concept of the community, turning collectivism into a dirty word, instead putting the focus on individual responsibility and achievement. If you're living in poverty, it's because you're lazy. If you're wealthy, must be because you're great and worked very hard. Neoliberalism is also characterized by a fetishistic devotion to the free market as the solution to all the world's ills. Rampant deregulation, destruction and privatization of social services, and incredible riches for a few while the rest of us get the scraps. The government needs to mind its business when corporations want to do as they please, but as soon as they fail and need bailing out, well, you can bet they'll be there with a bit of good old welfare. Most importantly, neoliberalism has been incredibly effective at presenting itself as something natural, as a default human state. Mark Fisher describes this in his book Capitalist Realism. The title refers to a phenomenon he describes as the widespread sense that not only is capitalism the only viable political and economic system, but also that it is now impossible even to imagine a coherent alternative to it. Later in the book, he goes on to describe the process by which an ideology ceases to be seen as ideological. An ideological position can never be really successful until it is naturalized. It cannot be naturalized while it is still thought of as a value rather than a fact. Accordingly, neoliberalism has sought to eliminate the very category of value in an ethical sense. Over the past 30 years, capitalist realism has successfully installed a business ontology, in which it is simply obvious that everything in society, including healthcare and education, should be run as a business. So here we are, the end of history. Communism has been beaten back, dissenting ideas have been crushed, and any person of sound mind would surely agree there is no economic system, no other way of doing anything that could rival neoliberal capitalism. This is humanity's final form. Now that we've achieved the perfect system, even the end of the world couldn't change it.
I don't want to set the world on fire.
What if capitalism killed the world, but it survived? The Fallout series takes place in an alternate Earth that seemingly stopped culturally developing at a point similar to our 1950s, when a global nuclear war destroyed civilization as well as most life on the planet. The world of Fallout is a tragic but humorous snapshot of 50s style and Cold War hysteria trapped in time forever, and progressively becoming the backdrop to the more pressing current events of the games themselves. Many of the factions fighting for power of the various corners of the wasteland simply replicate the political ideologies of the pre-war era, clearly meant as ghoulish exaggerations of real-world politics, though often it's telling how little they need to exaggerate. Unlike many post-apocalyptic settings that at most give a passing explanation for how the world fell, and focus on the people and events after that fall, Fallout keeps the old world and the new irradiated world fundamentally tied together, and it uses the factions at play in its universe as political allegory, perhaps in the hope that removed from the context of a world we recognize, we can see these ideas with new eyes. To discuss the politics of Fallout, we first need to talk about the events that led to the destruction of civilization. Before the Great War that saw the major global powers launching their nuclear arsenals at each other, the stability of the world was rocked by an energy crisis. This universe's technology was even less energy efficient than our own, and as they quickly sapped the fossil fuel reserves of the planet, pushed on by consumerism and military investment, war in the Middle East over oil began to break out with a European invasion. No political parallels to draw there. The Americans eventually discovered what very well could have been the last untapped source of crude oil in Alaska, which quickly resulted in war with China, ultimately leading to the launching of the nukes. The Fallout universe has mostly kept it ambiguous who launched first. There's one character in Fallout 2 who insists the Chinese launched first, and I imagine if we were able to speak to anyone from China, we could find someone insisting the Americans launched first. But if we were to look at any of the global powers at the time to understand who instigated the end of the world, we would come up dry. The nuclear apocalypse was not the work of the Americans, the Chinese, or the Soviets. It was Vault-Tec, an incredibly large, powerful, and well-connected corporation with the US government in their pocket, who stood to profit immensely from the hysteria of nuclear Armageddon. It's made clear throughout the various log entries in the games that the Vault-Tec higher-ups knew exactly when the end was going to come, and it's even explicitly stated in the script of an unmade Fallout film that the Vault-Tec executive launched the first nuke. It perfectly completes the narrative of the Fallout universe for Vault-Tec itself to have begun the nuclear war. Global destruction, the likes of which humanity had never seen before, all because of one massive, unchecked company. Let's fast forward to the post-apocalyptic Fallout world we're familiar with. Through factions like the Brotherhood of Steel, as well as an assortment of pre-war robots we meet throughout the wasteland, we get glimpses into the mentality of the US military leading up to the war. Aggressive, jingoistic, xenophobic, and hilariously anti-communist. Fallout pokes fun at the better dead than red attitude of Cold War-era America. And even their most heavy-handed satirical characters like Liberty Prime honestly are only a very slight exaggeration of what the real Red Scare sounded like. Many fans of the series have unwittingly made this political commentary much more cutting by seemingly not understanding that this attitude is being mocked. Instead, identifying with this mentality and happily repeating these quotes as if they weren't intended to be seen as a ridiculous relic from a world that destroyed itself with these very attitudes. While this overt political commentary tells us a lot about the Fallout universe, there's something else at work here. Capitalism may have killed the world, but it didn't die. The Wasteland is a snapshot of pre-war America. Sometimes in literal ways, as you discover skeletons of people killed by the bombs, endlessly repeating their final acts for nothing. But more than that, the political questions haven't moved on. 200 years and the end of all things, and we still have a militaristic conservative group obsessed with protecting this image of an ideal world from a period in the past, and killing anyone that conflicts with this image. We still have neoliberal ideologues waxing poetic about the importance of individual liberty while using state violence to control their citizens. We still have incredibly wealthy and well-connected men manipulating political events towards their own desires. We still buy and sell necessities on the market, even using a materially worthless but symbolically valuable currency, something as arbitrary as a bottle cap. Does it look familiar? You can paint it up in a gray-brown hue and add a few fantasy creatures and mutations, but nothing's really changed. Nowhere is neoliberalism's alienating banality felt more than in the interaction you, the player character, have with the world in these games. You are individualism personified. Able to do more or less anything you want. You as an individual can go where you want, take what you want, provided you have the force to protect it. But you can't meaningfully interact with society itself. You have theoretically endless freedom, but can affect nothing. 90% of the time you spend in the game, you're completing tasks that leave the world identical to how it was before you began the game. The one moment of agency you're afforded generally comes at the end, when you get to choose a faction and their corresponding real-world ideology and win that little shred of wasteland for them. And then, still nothing changes. The names of the people controlling certain locations change, but there's no systemic change, no economic change. The new faction in charge might be making life a bit better or worse for the faction they like/dislike, but capitalism continues to replicate itself throughout the wasteland. At no point does your player character or anyone else in the game even seem to question this. Hell, hardly anybody even seems interested in how the world was destroyed in the first place. Fights to control certain areas in the name of certain factions are strictly in the interest of power. It doesn't even occur to any of the factions in the game to meaningfully build something beyond what existed before the war. They genuinely can't imagine a world outside of the world they know that has been so fundamentally shaped by pre-war capitalism. This is just the way we do things. There is no alternative. It's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. The true dystopia of the Fallout universe isn't because of the bombs. It's because even the bombs couldn't stop neoliberal capitalism's hegemony over not just our economic system, but the way we think about the world and how we can interact with it. The irony is probably not lost on Bethesda either, that they've released multiple titles in a universe where an unchecked corporation caused the downfall of civilization, and the economic model that facilitates their $3 billion net worth is painted in such a grim light. However, Bethesda knows that they have nothing to worry about. I find this is best explained by what Robert Fowler describes as interpassivity, the delegation of pleasure and consumption, but also the delegation of activity. For example, consuming a piece of media that is anti-capitalist and feeling a sort of catharsis, as if you yourself had opposed capitalism, as if you yourself had taken an action, when in reality, all you've done is give Bethesda your $60. Remember, neoliberalism seeks to present itself as something apolitical, as a fact rather than a value, so it can and will commodify other political ideologies, happily displaying them as some quaint novelty, something obviously not applicable in this modern, post-historical era. If there is a market for anti-capitalism, the capitalists will sell it to you. Even in our fictional worlds, we can scarcely escape the all-encompassing influence of capitalist realism. Even between battling super mutants and navigating underground vaults full of hostile robots, there is an unspoken understanding that the main values of neoliberalism remain the default. In Fisher's book, he says this about Nirvana frontman Kurt Cobain. In his dreadful lassitude and objectless rage, Cobain seemed to give wearied voice to the despondency of the generation that had come after history, whose every move was anticipated, tracked, bought, and sold before it had even happened. Cobain knew that he was just another piece of spectacle, that nothing runs better on MTV than a protest against MTV, knew that his every move was a cliché scripted in advance, knew that even realizing it is a cliché. Cobain found himself in a world in which stylistic innovation is no longer possible, where all that is left is to imitate dead styles, to speak through the masks and with the voices of the styles in the imaginary museum. The skeletons littered throughout the wasteland aren't the only ones frozen in time. Just like the factions throughout the Fallout games endlessly replicate the inconsequential political squabbles of the neoliberal era, so do we. So long as neoliberalism succeeds at making itself a fact and not a value, common sense and not ideology, we will remain intellectually paralyzed, unable to meaningfully solve any of our problems because we cannot imagine solutions beyond the level of the individual. As such, we will remain trapped in time, endlessly refighting the same political battles, rehashing the same cultural moments and discussions. We will remain a snapshot, endlessly repeating our final act for nothing.
I don't want to set the world on fire. I just want to start a flame in your heart. In my heart I have but one desire, and that one is you. No other will